Hello guys, Jake Raby here, Flat 6 Innovations. We're going to be doing an R43 4.3 liter test drive today in this very well used 997.1. Car has 52,000 miles on it, and I just want to show everybody out there that we don't just do work like this on pristine cars. This car has been what we've referred to as world worn. It's a car from Southern California. It's got some rock chips. It's got this. It's got that. You can tell that it's been driven as intended. So a lot of times people think that somebody would only make the kind of expenditure for something like a 4.3 liter engine for a car that's a pristine garage queen. Not the case here, right? And not the case a lot of times, because people buy engines from us because they want to use the damn car, not because it's going to sit into a garage. Matter of fact, I really don't even prefer to build engines for garage queens, because those cars consistently have problems that other cars don't. So we're going to do a little bit of a test drive here. I've got a camera on board in the car. As you can see here, 52,000 miles are showing on the odometer. You can tell the car's been driven. Look at that. E-brake handle even has wear on it. And this is what we like to see. So we're going to do a little bit of a test drive here, and let me show you what it's got. All right, change camera views here. It's a Friday, just casually goofing off. Came to go drive a couple of cars. This car, as well as a 4.3 liter powered Boxster S from 2005. And you'll see a video of that one once we get to that point. It's still got to have a lot of break-in work done to it. So we're going to fire this 9971 up, 4.3 liter. It hasn't been started today, so we're going to warm it up a little bit, and I'm going to take you on a little bit of a drive here in the beautiful North Georgia mountains on an awesome spring day, which is actually April Fool's Day, okay? So no drama, right? No drama there. People think that an engine like this is going to fire up and sound like some kind of wild animal. That's not the case, okay? We try to make this a very refined power. We don't want to make this car undrivable. We don't want to make it a pain to drive. We want it so your wife can still drive the car. And we want to make it where it is tractable and it's reliable and it has consistent power delivery that you can expect. It's not something that has a crazy power band, and it does not need to rev over 7,000 RPM to make its power. Again, it does not need to rev over 7,000 RPM to make all of its power. This is not a GT3 type of power band. We are by no means going to try to compare this engine to a GT3, because this engine was built by hand, designed in America, refined in Cleveland, Georgia, and built with all USA made parts and American hands. So take you for a little bit of a drive here and show you what it's got. So just kind of leaving the compound here, and you notice I didn't let it warm up for a long time, and that's consistent with what we've learned. We don't like to let engines sit there and warm up for a long time. Just a few seconds, and we'll start putting a little bit of light load on the engine so it goes ahead and warms up a little bit faster. The faster it warms up, the more it's going to come off cold start. Again, very tractable, very easy to drive. At this point, if I did not know that this engine was making 465 horsepower, I would not know that it has been modified at all. This is our goal. We don't want this car to feel like a project car. We want it to be refined, have that tractable, reliable, consistent power, and you know when it's going to come on every time. So right now my coolant temperature is only about 140 degrees. My oil temperature is not even at 150 yet. So I'm not going to beat on this at all at this point. You've got to let the oil get some heat in it. You've got to let the coolant get some heat in it. You've got to let the thermostat open. So we're going to end up without a thermal shock to this engine. This is not just because it's new. This is what you should do every time you drive your own car. worst thing for these cars is allowing them to set idle and warm up over a period of time with no load. And this is the reason why most of the cars that we see that have bore scoring came from a climate that promoted that. People want to have their butt warm when they get in the car, and they think they're doing it a favor by letting it sit there and idle for a long time. But what they don't know is basically the longer the engine takes to get to an operating temperature, the longer the engine stays on cold start enrichment, and then you have excess fuel dumping into the cylinders for a longer period of time. And fuel is solvent. Fuel is not lubricant. Fuel will cut the lubricant, and you'll end up in a scenario where you're promoting wear and you're promoting fuel intrusion into your oil, and you're causing other problems that you don't know about because you thought that warming the engine up was a good thing. And don't get me wrong, you want to warm it up correctly. So you can see what I'm doing here. Until I get the engine up to the 175 range on the coolant temp, it's still not there yet. And until I get the oil temperature up to where it's coming off the gauge at 150 in this 9971, I'm not going to jump on this throttle hard at all. I'm short shifting at no more than 3,200 RPM. This is what gets the engine off of cold start quicker, and also keeps you from having thermal shock. Thermal shock is the main thing that we want to avoid, along with obviously too much fuel dumping into the cylinders, because that fuel cuts that protective layer of oil off of the cylinders. It affects the sealing of the piston rings, and then you're therefore going to be able to contaminate the engine oil supply with carbon that comes from the hydrocarbons in the combustion process, along with fuel that is not burning. And because the engine's not warmed up, and it's still dumping more fuel than the engine wants. The ECU is trying to protect the environment. What is best for the environment is not what is best for the engine, okay? That's why we see modern cars have failures, because the environment is the primary concern. And heating up and lighting off the catalytic converters is a requirement where more fuel comes into play, and different camshaft positions and different ignition timing, different valve timing, all that comes into play to make the catalytic converters efficient. And that is because of the environment. So everything with the environment is impacting the mechanicals of your engine, whether you know it or not. So now my oil temperature has come off the gauge here. It's at about 170, in that neighborhood, 175. And something else I'll tell you guys is, if you have a 997.1 or a 987.1 especially, your coolant temperature gauge is absolutely lying to you. It'll say you're at 175 if you're at 160. It'll say you're at 175 if you're at 200 or if you're at 210. Until you get to 240 or so, it's not going to show anything above 175. That gauge is lying to you. So now we've got some temperature in the engine, and I'll give you a little taste here. That's about half throttle. And you notice how it comes to life. It goes from refined to nasty as quickly as you want it to. And it is very consistent. It is very reliable in its power delivery. You know every time when that tach hits 3,500 RPM that it's going to come on like a rocket ship if you're at wide open throttle or even at 3/4 throttle. If you're not there, it doesn't do that. That's what makes your wife still want to drive this car. It doesn't have a crazy exhaust on it. It doesn't have titanium headers on it. It doesn't have any bullshit on it. What this engine has is everything that it needs and nothing that it doesn't. That's basically my calling card here. We give it everything it needs and nothing that it doesn't. I don't like bells and whistles that don't play my tune. All right, so again, I'm at about 3,200 RPM. I'm gonna slow down here a little bit. I'm in third gear. Coming up on the cams, coming up on the heads. It just keeps pulling. Now, that was never more than 6,500 RPM. I don't give a damn about your 8,000, 9,000 RPM performance. When people want to compare this engine to a GT3, they have to understand that that is absolutely impossible to do. Because to make this kind of power from a GT3, the engine has to turn 8,000 RPM. We're not there. So now I'm in first gear. I'm going to slow down a little bit. 2,000, 2,500. Go through this little turn here. Car pushes a little bit. All right, third gear. We're going to come back down here to about 3,200 because the dyno graph from this engine is like you flipped a switch at about 3,500 if you're at wide open throttle, okay? 3/4 throttle, up on the cams, up on the heads. That was $7,000 in third gear. So a car like this is refined, consistent, reliable. It has everything it needs and nothing that it doesn't. People would think that something like this would sit there and idle with a rough idle and it would have all the calling cards of a hot rod, but it doesn't. That's what we've actually shot to get rid of. All right, so first gear, all right, second gear, 2,500 RPM. We're gonna come up on the cams, we're gonna come up on the heads. Watch how quick that happens. Up on the cams, up on the heads. Reliable and consistent. I know at 3,500 RPM, my camshafts are going to come in like a banshee. I know at 4,500 RPM, these really high-flowing ported cylinder heads that are the most badass ones in the world for this engine are going to come in like a banshee. And I know that above 5,000 RPM, this engine's going to keep pulling all the way to about $7,000, and it's going to start to level off. So I never had this engine over 6,800 RPM with what we've been driving here at this point. You know, if it had an exhaust system on it that sounded the part, and if it had some crazy intake system on it that really doesn't work for anything other than making noise, then the driving experience would be even a little bit more enhanced from an audible perspective. But I know those things are going to take away from my engine, so that's why we didn't use them. I don't allow people to tell me what they want. I allow people to tell me what they need, and they don't really know it. So if they tell me how they want to drive the car, then I end up creating that. And I don't want there to be any negatives created by all my positives, okay? It's real easy to put some carbon fiber intake system on one of these things, increase that audible experience, and lose everything else. Lose efficiency, lose all that, okay? Back down to third gear, 3,200, 35, here comes our cams, there's our heads. You notice when I hit that next gear, when I went from third gear to fourth gear, you notice it pulls immediately. There's no ball, and then it goes. It's absolutely instantaneous, 100% immediate throttle response. That comes from port velocity, mixture motion, swirl in the cylinder heads, and badass camshafts. All those things together. This may be a 4.3 liter engine, but make no mistake, the displacement is not responsible for what you are experiencing here. This is a well-round equation. The 4.3 liters just allows us to do things you can't do at lower displacement levels without losing something. Basically, making this engine as big as it is allows us to use crazy cylinder heads, crazy camshafts that on an engine that was stock displacement would make this engine undrivable because it would move all the air at one time. It wouldn't be consistent. It wouldn't be reliable. You wouldn't have that very linear power delivery that is basically a hallmark of what we're doing here. You would have something that's on or off, it's a bitch to drive, it's inconsistent, and all that. Basically, the 4.3 liters is just the door that is open to performance, so we can use these other things and not create some engine that wants to rev all the time, and that's all it's good at. So people need to look at the bigger is better factor here. Bigger is not better. Bigger is only better if you're able to maintain efficiency. And that means the right cylinder heads, the right camshafts, the right camshaft timing. When we're using camshafts like this, we can't use the factory tools. We have our own method of timing these engines, which is a lot like an air-cooled Porsche, or a lot like some Italian engines that I've worked on. So that's really kind of the flat six difference with a 4.3 liter engine, is the fact that the displacement allows us to do crazy things and not lose anything while doing that. It is kind of the key to the door. And it's taken us a long time to be able to reliably create a package of 4.3 liters. All right, second gear, 2,500 RPM. Here we go. Cams, heads. I short shifted a little bit in fourth. But I know every time that I hit the throttle, exactly where the power is going to start to come in, exactly how long that power level is going to stay in before the next power level comes in, and how long that's going to stay in before I've got to shift. I don't even need to watch the tack. I was watching this one, but I don't have to. Same thing on the dyno, and this is what we shoot for. We want linear power. I really don't give a damn about a peak horsepower number. Everybody's worried about that. You know, let me show you this dyno graph. Look at how much power this made. But what separates the men from the boys with this engine is the fact that we are able to make higher average horsepower from 2,000 to 7,000 RPM than anybody in the world. And I challenge anybody to make higher average power, because while they've all been worried about making bigger peak power because that's what their customer understands and wants to see, we've been focusing on making higher average power and doing that over a broader power range where we have reliable, consistent power delivery in every gear and every RPM. Guess what? That also gives us good fuel economy, okay? It also gives us good reliability and good longevity. Even an engine like this on the track, there's no need for the owner of this car, if he takes it to the track, to use over 6,300 RPM. There's no reason, because at 6,300 RPM, we're exactly where this engine wants you to shift to get to that next gear and use the torque curve. Guys that run against the rev limiter all the time, they don't know what they're missing with a big engine like this. This car is faster if you shift it earlier than it is if you wind it out to 7,000 RPM every time. Sometimes our customers will get a car, especially if they've had the car for a long time, they'll get their engine back and they're like, you know, this car, it's not the way it used to be. Well, don't expect it to be, right? Don't have an expectation for it to be anything like it used to be. You know, all the things you used to do with it are going to change, and it should. when you consider the amount of life and development that's been expended to create something like this. So I'm at a traffic light. I got power right there, right? It's like this car's not even modified, okay, at all. That's refinement. That's what we get from development. If I wanted to kill the drivability, I could make another 40 horsepower from this combination. We've done it. We're on the cusp of 500 horsepower normally aspirated with one of these engines at the 4.3 liter arena. But we haven't broken 500, and we're a little bit farther away from it than I'd like to be at this point. But that's what happens when we have to develop things and take time to do that. All right, so I got to run a couple of errands here, guys. So I just wanted to take you on this little drive in this R43 powered 997.1. Mr. Carlson will be getting this car back next week. Of course, with the Ukrainian war and energy crises and all that sort of thing, shipping cars has been a bit of a challenge. We are still able to keep on doing it. It just takes a little bit longer to get a good driver. So that's the reason why I'm able to drive this car with you today, is because it's taking us a little bit longer to ship it. So Jake Raby here, Flat 6 Innovations. Glad you're able to come for this ride in this R43 powered beast. Just wanted to share a little bit of my day with you. So now I've got to run in here and do a few errands. And maybe later this afternoon I'll take you on a drive in a R43 powered 986 Boxster. Thanks guys. Have a great weekend. Have a great spring.